Hello, welcome to the Dan O'Can YouTube channel. As you can see, I'm standing here on what is an abandoned road allowance, and I am on the banks of the Bow River, right in the heart of the Palliser Triangle, kind of in the middle of nowhere between Vauxhall and Medicine Hat. I'm here for a very specific reason, and I'm going to get into the more historic details of that reason in a moment. But first, let me kind of give you the background of how I know about this place and what I uncovered last night that made me really want to come down here and show it to you and get the drone out. So I am here at an area known as Ronalane, Alberta. And as you can see, there's not much out here other than the Bow River, but that was not always the intention. But again, I'll get into that. First of all, Emily is away this weekend. She's visiting her parents for a week. So it's just Mabel and I today. And I knew I wanted to do some sort of a road trip, and I had an itching to get out on the prairie. And it's been a long time since I had come to Ronalane. Now, I used to live in the Vauxhall area back in the early 1990s, and I became familiar with Ronalane because this back road runs between Vauxhall and Medicine Hat, and it was a much more convenient way to go to Medicine Hat than going all the way south to Tabor. And the highlight of that drive was always this, the Ronalane Bridge. Now, at the time when I made the trips out here, this was still the active bridge and carried all the highway traffic along this route. It has since been bypassed and abandoned, so I'm going to estimate it's probably been abandoned for about 30 years now. So in attempting to do some research for this video, I learned that the bridge was built by the Southern Alberta Land Company around circa 1912. And it was built for two purposes. The primary one was, of course, traffic. And the second reason was it was also designed to carry an irrigation siphon or pipe across the Bow River. And this is where I really fell into a deep hole last night when I was doing research about the bridge. I decided I wanted to learn more about the Southern Alberta Land Company. So the Southern Alberta Land Company was the brainchild of a fella named McGregor. And McGregor was a rancher originally from the Brandon, Manitoba area, but who was living out in this area. And riding the lands around here, he noticed that the soil was really good and conducive for growing excellent grass and things for cattle. But he had this idea that if they could somehow irrigate the land, it could also be used for actual farming and crops. And so he had bantered this idea around with various people for a number of years. And then finally he decided to approach some financiers out of Great Britain. They agreed to back the project. And so that set off what was known as the Big Ditch. Now, the Big Ditch would have been a massive undertaking even today, but we're talking in the era around 1908, 1910. So McGregor gets the money together, and they start by surveying the land. And after doing a massive survey, they come to the conclusion that the best place to start taking water from the Bow River that would give them the biggest area covered with irrigation was about 190 miles from this spot near Carsland, Alberta. So you can imagine trying to push a 190-mile canal across the prairie in the early 1900s, especially in this area. The land had been surveyed, so there were road allowances set out, but there were no actual roads. They didn't even have enough horses that they actually had to import mules from St. Louis, Missouri to work on the project. But armed with hundreds of men and a couple of steam shovels, they started and built, well, we'll find out more about this later, mostly built the big ditch. So I found an article from the Calgary Herald from 1912 that talks about the big ditch and the grand opening for it. They had the Duke of Connaught come over from Great Britain. They had, you know, dignitaries. A lot of people came out to see the opening. Now, I didn't get a chance to get all the way through the research. There's hours of research to be done, and I just scratched the surface, and I was still up past midnight last night. Long story short, it didn't work. There were engineering problems, design problems, and it never made it any further than this. I mean, they still made it 190 miles, but this bridge was supposed to be carrying the water using the giant siphon pipe across this valley and up the other side to irrigate the lands between here and Medicine Hat. It didn't happen. I mean, there are a lot of logistical challenges of pushing water that far, not the least of which is the amount of seepage and the amount of evaporation that's going to cause you to lose water. So, like I said, there was a whole host of reasons why it didn't work, but the plan was there, and the plan was grandiose. In fact, at one time, there were plans of running a railway line all the way from Suffield through this area and all the way down to Lethbridge. They even plotted out towns, and one of those towns was Ronalane, named for Ronald Lane, who was, I believe, the superintendent of the company or something along those lines. I only did the research last night. I'm going to forget things and get details wrong. But Ronalane was going to be the crown jewel of this area. There was significant natural gas deposits in the area. There was obviously a good source of water. And the other part of it was they were going to use the hydraulic pressure of the water coming down the valley to generate electricity. So, you know, when you're talking 1910, 1912, having people, giving them, you know, running water, electricity, this was set to be a big place. And as they described it, all nestled in a beautiful bend at the Bow River. Now, I don't know exactly where along here the town site was expected to be. I just know it was in this general area. Now, as I said, the big ditch is an entire video project unto itself, and I have great plans of researching it further and actually creating that video someday. It may have to wait till I retire because, like I said, it's a massive undertaking. Not as big as the project itself was, but it's not a quick 6-minute video type thing. So the bottom line is it didn't happen, it didn't work. Ronalane never really developed. We were left with this beautiful bridge that still carried vehicle traffic, but it never did carry that siphon pipe across the valley. Now, rumor is, and I can't confirm this because it's all locked behind private property, that on the other side of this bridge there are actually the cement cradles in the hill where that siphon pipe was supposed to be carried up once it was built. They had plans. They dug the canal, but never filled it with water. They put all the, like I said, the concrete cradles for the siphon pipe in there. They were even apparently grading the rail bed. So it was great plans. It just didn't happen. Now you can see here, there's still to this day a canal that comes down and runs into the Bow River here on the west side of the river. But that's as far as it made it. So now as I make my way back up the hill towards the truck, I want to talk about my personal connection to the bridge. Not only have I crossed this bridge multiple times in a vehicle when it was still open to traffic, but I used to have a 1980 Toyota four-wheel drive pickup truck. And my ex-brother-in-law and I used to take our truck, or take my truck, and come out here and go four-wheeling up in those hills on the other side of the bridge. And I'll get a look at that with the drone once I get up on top of the hill and get it up there. But the story that I wanted to tell was that one night we were out here in the evening doing the four-wheel drive routine, and Mabel's pulling on my hand here, so forgive the shaky video. And we were coming down the hill. I was in 4 low and first gear, crawling down the hill, when suddenly there was a huge bang, and the truck let loose and just started rocketing down the hill. So I had to stand on the brakes really hard. We finally got to a stop at the bottom of the hill, and the truck wouldn't move. Now, I would later learn we had blown out the clutch plate inside the transmission. I guess there was just so much stress on it coming down the hill. And this was in the era before there was really good cell coverage, but he happened to have a cell phone provided by his company, and he had to climb all the way back up to the top of one of those hills to get enough service so that we could call and get somebody to come rescue us. So, little personal anecdote. I'm a little nervous about whether or not the truck's going to start when I go to leave, just because it's not the first time I've been stranded out here in the middle of nowhere. All right, everyone, hope you enjoyed that little bit of drone footage and a little bit of the history of the Ronalane Bridge. like I said, one day I will do a much bigger video about the big ditch and the project, and maybe we'll even follow the trail of it all the way from Carsland to here, but that's going to have to wait for another day because not enough of you are subscribing and watching to make this a full-time gig. Anywho, I do appreciate every one of you that has taken the time to watch the videos, whether it's this one or other ones. We'll see you in the next one.